Hello and welcome to episode number 73 of Weekend Review. My name is Sean, and on this week's show we're talking about X-Men Dark Phoenix, Toy Story 2. We're going to celebrate the greatest movie ever made, which turns 15 today, and we're going to look forward to this week's new releases. Our first movie this week is Dark Phoenix, and I really enjoyed this movie. I think this is a good movie. X-Men Dark Phoenix is the retelling, I guess, of the Dark Phoenix storyline from the comics, and then from that third movie that they probably hope you totally forget / probably erased because of X-Men Days of Future Past, and boy, the timeline on this one is really messy. It starts in 1975, and we learn with Jean Grey that she has powers, and we see how that kind of goofs things up in her childhood and her introduction to Professor Xavier and the Academy for Gifted Children. After this, we jump to 1992. The president has called Professor Xavier, and he needs the X-Men to go save astronauts from space. After some tinkering with the X-Jet, they head up that way. Things don't go super well, and Jean Grey absorbs a bunch of something. After the X-Men get back down to Earth and they discover that Jean, after she absorbs everything, is now like literally off their charts powerful, like their technology can't figure out how powerful she is. We learn that Raven has a little bit of a problem with who the X-Men are, what they represent. She even makes a good quip about like, it should be called the X-Women for how many times we keep having to save you guys. And she questions like what she's doing with it. It's an interesting little wrinkle, and I like the way that it shows that there's a fracture within the X-Men themselves. Like, not only do they have to fight all of these villains and do all this extra stuff, but like internally there may be problems that start brewing because of the really great job that the X-Men did saving the astronauts and bringing everybody down to Earth and being safe, or returning safely, I guess. They throw a party, and it's at this point that Jean really starts to lose control on her powers. Like, she has a pretty good grip of them, but because of what she's absorbed, obviously she's again off the charts. The more Jean loses grip of her powers, the more she hurts the people that she loves, the more conflicted she becomes because she starts to unlock memories that Professor Xavier has kind of blocked off from her. She then starts to see things a little bit more clearly, and it puts Professor Xavier in a little bit more of a villainous spot. So when you go back and you look at it, and it's like, oh, Raven already has problems with him. Now he's doing this sort of thing. Like, is Professor X the really good character that we think he is, or is he a little more devious and selfish? And I like that they put him in a little bit of a different light. I also really like, and this is one of my favorite things about the X-Men, I like the way they interact with each other, not only within the group, but outside of the group. With Magneto and the Brotherhood of Steel, there are multiple characters that go talk to Magneto, and there's a weird, like, level of trust where Magneto knows that the X-Men probably aren't going to start a fight, and so when one of the X-Men shows up there is like he goes, no, like, we're cool, let's see what's going on at first. And he's brought into the fold after Jean goes and finds out some information. Once Magneto joins the fold, that's when things really start to pick up from an action perspective. A lot of it seems more character driven towards the beginning part, with the exception of the space scene, which is like really cool effects, and like Quicksilver gets to do his thing. Two very minor items of note here, I guess mild spoilers, just like as a heads up. One, Jubilee is nowhere to be found in this movie, even though she was in Apocalypse, and that feels like a total missed opportunity. And two, Quicksilver is removed from the plot fairly quickly. One of my favorite things about this movie is that Cyclops actually has something to do. If you remember, which you probably don't because X-Men The Last Stand is a terrible movie, because Bryan Singer left as director to go do Superman Returns, James Marsden left to go be in that movie, and instead of recasting Cyclops, which is what they should have done, they killed him off super early in the movie. So I was like, well, as a person whose favorite character is Cyclops, is like, oh cool. I really like that Cyclops vouches to make sure that Storm comes along on the trip, and it's a cool, like, I guess, trio of characters. Technically Professor X would be number 4, but as Nightcrawler, Cyclops, and Storm helping to try and get Jean before it's too late. I really like the Nightcrawler's arc. It's not like a terribly prominent thing, but it's like a subtle way of doing like an evolution of a hero that I thought was really interesting. He starts as a more like kind of timid and scared character, and I liked his evolution through the last half of the movie. It really worked for me, and I thought it was cool to see him really use all of his powers and so effectively. Like, Nightcrawler is a really cool and interesting concept as a character. Like, he can just disappear and reappear and like throw people around, and it's really awesome. I can totally understand where a large complaint from this movie is going to come from, is that it seems like it's really easy to kind of swing Jean Grey one way or the other, but I liked the way that it shows her backstory in kind of like three separate areas. We get the very initial setup, and so we see it from one angle. And then we see it later from a different angle where she thinks she knows kind of everything that's going on, but maybe doesn't quite have the full memory there. And then we see it from a third, like, final angle that kind of puts some additional pieces together. And while it may be a little bit easier to kind of swing her in one direction or the other, I liked the way that resolved and led to the climactic event of the movie, which takes place on a train. And I won't say much more beyond that. I probably already said a little bit too much as it is, but it's a movie that worked well for me. Overall, I found X-Men Dark Phoenix to be a very enjoyable movie. I liked the story of the movie. I liked the characters. I liked the dynamics between them. I thought they put some interesting wrinkles in there. And it was just a movie that put a big smile on my face. I was super happy that Cyclops actually got to do something because he was killed off so early in The Last Stand. What a garbage movie that is. And it's just, I don't know, it was a movie that I walked out and I was like, yeah, like, I had a good time. And that's all you can really ask for from a movie like this. Our second movie this week is Toy Story 2, and it's continuing our lead up to Toy Story 4, including Toy Story 4 in 2 weeks, actually. Holy moly, it's almost here. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. And watching through these movies is making me even more excited because I love them so much. And Toy Story 2 is actually a miracle movie on two fronts. One, it's a sequel that lives up to its predecessor. Even if I do prefer Toy Story 1 to Toy Story 2, it still is every bit as good. It's just a personal preference sort of thing. I like the characteristic of Woody and his turn and how dark he is. I like that aspect of it when compared to this movie. It's like you're comparing like two masterpieces, right? You're like, this one I just like slightly a little bit more because it works, like, speaks to me a little bit differently. And the second reason this movie is a miracle is because it even exists in the state it exists. That is a really hard sentence to say. It was like in my head and it had a lot of trouble getting out of the mouth. As I mentioned last week, I was going to tell you my favorite story from Toy Story 2, and that story is this. This movie was originally conceived as a straight-to-video release because Disney had experienced a ton of success, like $100 million worth of success with Aladdin's Return of Jafar as a straight-to-video release. So they were like, well, we'll just do Toy Story 2. We'll just make that straight-to-video, whatever, like, it's not that big of a deal. Pixar at the time had moved on to make A Bug's Life, and after showing a couple of reels of the Toy Story that was going to be straight-to-video, Disney thought, hey, like, we can make this into like a feature, like we can put this in theaters. And Bug's Life released in 1998. After the European tour ended, the creative team came back to Pixar, looked at Toy Story that was supposed to be, well, Toy Story 2 that was supposed to be released straight to video, and said, this is unacceptable. We're not releasing this in theaters. You have to let us restart. And they argued with Disney about it, of like, we need to start from the very beginning. And Disney was like, no, like, we're just going to push this out. Like, this is what's going to happen. It's going to launch, in, I think, in November of 1999. Like, that's what's going to happen. And they said, we're going to start from scratch anyway. And this movie came together in 9 months, and that is incredible. Like, originally it had something to do with Buzz Lightyear being recalled or something like that, and the toys had to go find him or rescue him, whatever that is. Instead, it's Woody learning he's part of a big TV show, and he's a big collector's item, and like, he's very famous and valuable. And I really like that. I love the way they expand on the world of Toy Story in this movie. I love that we get Zurg in this movie. I love the Woody's Roundup stuff. I think it's super interesting. It's nothing that ever really needs to be expanded upon, but it is, and it works. In every scenario, it works. And I find myself having a hard time, like, talking about this stuff, mainly because of, like, I don't want to be like, it's rose-tinted glasses and I'm overlooking things, but these are such a joy to watch. Like, I'm sure I mentioned it in the first one, where it's just like, I sat there and I was like, man, this puts a smile on my face. It's really, really amazing. I said the same thing with Aladdin from 1992, and it's just, these movies, for as much as I love them, and for as much as the rose-tinted glasses are probably a factor in some regard, they still hold up and they are still magnificent. The movie starts with what we later find out is a video game, and it's such a subtle difference. Like, he has the utility belt. Like, that's the only thing that's different, and it does such a good job of not, like, drawing attention to it. Like, it's there, if you notice it. And I'm sure as a 9-year-old kid in the theater, I had no idea that was there until they make the reveal and you go like, oh, like, okay, like it's a video game. And it's probably the best looking video game of 1999 because there's no way a Super Nintendo game looked like that. But that's a separate point. It's after the video game sequence that we get reintroduced to all our favorite characters. It's Rex and Buzz playing the video game together. Like Buzz is watching and trying to encourage Rex to be able to beat the boss, but Rex's arms are just a little bit too short for the controller. We find out that Woody is preparing and he can't find his hat. He's preparing to go to cowboy camp and he's really looking forward to just having time with like him and Andy. He seems like a much nicer character and a more like caring and understanding character, but he still really values that time where it's like just him and Andy. And after a dastardly 5-minute play session, his arm is ripped and he gets set up on the shelf, where we learn about Wheezy, which is a character that I don't think is ever mentioned in the first movie. I could be wrong on that, but I highly doubt it. We meet Wheezy and we kind of see that like parental mindset of like, we'll tell the kid one thing, we'll put it up, they'll forget about it. It's not that big of a deal, but we get to see it through the eyes of the toys who go like, she just said it to calm him down and now I've been stuck up here. And Woody goes, well, why didn't you call for help? And Wheezy says, well, I tried, but the dust aggravates my condition. And it's an interesting and funny exchange. We then get a dream sequence, which is done so well. Like, one of the things that I complain about with movies is how easy it is to kind of like pull the bait and switch stuff and not give the audience enough of a clue that something is a little bit off. With the dream sequence, the clue, or the pretty obvious tell, is that all the cards are the ace of spades, and that tells you that something's a little bit off and something's weird. And I like how much like it affects him. Like he knows he's seen with, you know, the example of Wheezy, who's sitting right over here. He's seen the example of, once I'm ripped or once I'm broken, like, that's it. Like, it's over. I've had such a good run. I've been the number one toy. Buzz and I are friends. Like, we moved. We survived all this stuff. And, like, this rip in my arm, that's going to be what ends this for me. And I don't know. I like that realization, that dreamlike state of, like, his worst nightmare is getting thrown in the trash can and getting pulled down and never seeing Andy again. And yet again, just like Toy Story 1 with its simple setup of what happens when a new toy arrives and someone else gets jealous, we get a very simple setup of Woody going out to rescue, things going wrong, and a collector committing a crime to benefit themselves. So we get the actions of a selfish man affecting a greater group of people. And I love the idea, like, it's a simple setup because it's an easy thing to, like, kind of wrap up and make go away, but it allows us to focus more on the character dynamics, which is super interesting because I really like all of these characters, as I'm sure I've said multiple times at this point. But it also allows them, the filmmakers, time to explore all these other things. Like the Woody's Roundup stuff works because they spend so much time with it, because Woody doesn't know anything and it's cool to watch them watch the old Woody's Roundup. And that might be the most incredible style of animation that they do. It's obviously like all black and white, but the way that the mouth movements are off and the way the strings work is all super fascinating to me. And I think they nailed it in such a way that I don't remember it like looking that good, but when I watched it, having like a little bit, like 20 years more experience in life and knowing what like Thunderbirds would be, which is the closest example I can think of, you know, marionette sort of stuff. I think that's something that plays well with young audiences because like it looks silly and looks goofy, but the way it's done is done so well that older audiences and adults like myself, I may as well put adults in air quotes, it works on a different level, and I think that really is what they nail so well in these movies. All of the expansions to this universe, the Woody's Roundup, adding Zurg into the mix, which Zurg is like in the first movie, which is fine, but he's not really a character at all, and he is in this movie. They're all good and they all feel right to the movie. Even the villainous character, Stinky Pete, is really great and conniving and able to get inside Woody's head and convince him to think maybe something that he doesn't, and he's manipulative in a way where when he's the one that turned on the TV at night, but he frames Jessie, again, like a little bit of a bait and switch thing. Jessie's a fantastic character. She's very angry and frustrated, and that typically comes out at Woody because she's more so, I would say, and that she's jealous that Woody still has someone and she doesn't have Emily. That song is still really effective and heart-wrenching. I remember when that song comes on, I would not want to be in the room, because it's a hard sequence to watch. It's very emotional and heartfelt, and it's really good. And last but not least, you have Bullseye, who, even though he doesn't say anything, has lots to do, and he's very expressive and engaging in that way. And I really like Bullseye and Jesse specifically as additions to the group. One thing that I should probably point out a little bit more with these movies is just how immaculately paced they are. They're so good because, I mean, obviously it starts with the characters. The characters are engaging and fun and interesting and funny, and they are just so well done on every level. But the way the story moves so beautifully between point A to point B to point C through to the end is just masterful in a way that all of a sudden it's like, man, this has been we're already a third of the way through the movie, or we're already two-thirds of the way, two-thirds of the way, we're already at the end. That hour and 32 minutes or so flew by, and you wouldn't notice that it was an hour and 32 minutes unless you looked at the back of the box and it says approximately 92 minutes. I also just know that because, of course, that would be something I know with this particular franchise. Everything about this movie is so great, and I love it so very much. It's been so much fun to rewatch these movies and rediscover why I like them so much. And I can't wait to watch Toy Story 3 and leading into Toy Story 4. It's just been such a wonderful experience. Toy Story 2 is every bit as good as Toy Story 1. They still hold up so well, and it's been such a joy to rediscover why I love these movies so much. The expansions of having Zurg in there, getting Al's Toy Barn, which so many of these things feel like they're just throwaway references in the first movie, but for them to come back in the second movie and be like, hey, this is what we want to do. We want to hone in on Woody's Roundup. We want to do something with Al's Toy Barn. We want to do something with Buzz Lightyear and his universe. If this were any other studio or a lesser studio, they probably would have thrown all of that away, and it wouldn't make as much sense, and it wouldn't feel as cohesive. But because this movie feels so cohesive, it just puts it on another level. And man, what a joy Toy Story 2 is. Before we go this week, I'd like to celebrate the 15th anniversary of Napoleon Dynamite, which is my favorite movie of all time. It released today, June 11th, 2004. And I remember going out and seeing some movie, I can't remember exactly what it was, but I remember seeing a trailer for this movie and immediately being drawn to it of I need to go see this. And when it released, we went the very next morning, and ever since then, it's been my favorite movie of all time. I love it. I think it is tremendously funny. I love this movie so much, I saw it 4 times in theaters. I saw it one more time at a Suds and Cinema event to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the movie. I own 5 copies of it on Blu-ray, and you better believe I had all kinds of t-shirts and a talking action figure and trading cards when I was 14, 15. This movie was my life when I was younger, and that persists now. I haven't watched it in a while, but man, I love Napoleon Dynamite so very much, and it's 15 years old, which is absolutely insane. Shockingly, I didn't plan this show out super well, and it got lost a little bit in the shuffle of E3, but I did want to give it a little bit of a shout out here at the end of the show because it is a monumentally important movie to me. Between Napoleon Dynamite and Shaun of the Dead, it really shows kind of that change of what I was watching to what I ended up watching. I wouldn't be going and seeing weird stuff like The Favorite or High Life or, oh god, I don't even, most of the movies that are on this show, Thoroughbreds, if it wasn't for smaller indie movies like that. So thanks to Shaun of the Dead, which is 15 years old this year as well, back in April, and more importantly to me personally, Napoleon Dynamite, it kind of broke me out of the rut of mainstream, super mainstream movies, which I realize kind of contradicts the 2 movies I've talked about on this show, but it is a great visual aid in the hey, you should go watch stuff that you don't know much about or have seen one preview for, and you might really like it. It might be your favorite movie of all time, and that's what Napoleon Dynamite is. Congratulations on 15 freaking sweet years, Napoleon Dynamite. You're the greatest movie ever made. Finally, on this week's show, we'll look forward to the new releases. Captain Marvel is on Blu-ray, in theaters, Men in Black International and Shaft, and then the games were a big kind of hodgepodge mess to figure out. There were 2 DLCs announced at Microsoft's conference that I thought were worth noting. There's a Lego DLC for Forza Horizon 4, and there is new DLC called Heartland for State of Decay 2. The streams this week are as follows. On Wednesday, a Men in Black International hype stream playing the very poorly received Men in Black Alien Crisis on the Xbox 360. On Friday, we're going to play, or hopefully finish, Marvel Ultimate Alliance 1, and then on Saturday it's going to be Lego Forza Horizon 4 DLC, and then on Sunday it'll be State of Decay 2 Heartland. So I actually didn't know what I was going to stream on Saturday or Sunday, and then E3 gave me the answer. They gifted me the answer. They said, Sean, we know you need something to play. Here you are. And I said, hey, thanks E3, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching this week's episode. If you like the content, scroll on down and hit that subscribe button. If you like the content enough, you can scroll on down and leave a comment. You can tell me what you thought of Toy Story 2 or what you think of Dark Phoenix. You can let me know what all you enjoyed from E3 if you're looking forward to any of the stuff that was announced. I know I have a lot to be excited about in the coming months. Check out the streams on Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and then be sure to check back every Tuesday for more Week in Review. We'll see you next week.